He sat at the edge of everything he had ever known, hands knotted into trembling fists, eyes swollen with exhaustion he couldn't admit even to himself. The walls of the Armada's command deck hummed with restrained violence, thousands of ships hanging silent in the void beyond thick panes of armor glass. His name was Bennett, a man raised for war, hardened by fear, worn ragged by the endless losses no one would ever count. At 37, he often felt the world had borrowed too much of him and wasn't even planning to return it. No matter how high he'd climbed, how many orders he'd given, Bennett never felt in command of himself, much less the ironclad juggernaut that rolled across space in his wake. Each day demanded more determination, more certainty than he had left. He missed home. He missed the sound of rain on glass, the easy laughter of his wife, the one whose face eluded his memory now like a wisp of fog. He missed peace, he realized bitterly, but was too proud to say so out loud. Everyone on the deck stood motionless, each heartbeat seeming to send ripples through the silence. For hours now, they'd just watched, sensors tuned to the impossible rift gaping ahead, the entrance to enemy space. The rift was ugly, unnatural, its darkness twisted against the universe like a wound that refused to heal. Everyone feared what would come spilling out. None realized what they were about to spill in. They'd spent decades fighting the Karvax, shapeless things from the dark edges who loved slaughter as easy as breathing. They were more advanced, more brutal, their weapons tearing through ships as if the Armada's steel had been paper. They had destroyed colonies, vaporized planets, and left nothing but ashes drifting in orbit around ruined suns. But that was before Project Dominion, before Earth's best minds and most desperate leaders had gambled everything. The Armada was the result. 10,000 warships, a core of vengeful steel rumbling with the willpower of a species backed into a corner. Bennett was picked to command for one reason only. He never blinked when shadows pressed close, never turned away from the cost. A young technician coughed quietly to his left, and Bennett caught his own reflection in the monitor, eyes ringed by fatigue, still burning, furious at fate. The countdown pulsed audibly, 30 seconds to rift entry. No speech was needed. Every officer, every hand, every soldier in the fleet knew what was at stake. They had come not merely to win, but to end this war forever. A memory flashed before him, his son, years ago, tugging at his uniform, asking if all wars felt like losing even when you won. Bennett had brushed it off with the gruff assurance a father thinks will hold, and it never had. He wondered what that little boy, now grown and somewhere amid these very ships, would think of him, now that it came to this final brink. Status? His voice was rougher than he wanted, but steady. All systems nominal. Shields up, full armament, jump readiness at 98%, replied his XO, an old friend from before the world grew teeth. There was no tremor in the man's voice, only resolve sharpened by loss. Then the rift began to pulse, space curdling in angry waves. 10 seconds, someone announced. Bennett's heart pounded, every regret in his life threatening to drag him under. He could see the comms officers sweating, the navigators bracing themselves for God knew what. He lifted his hand, his skin blotched, scarred by burns and bad choices, trembling almost imperceptibly, and laid it on the sensor. His code went through the system like a final blessing. Armada, jump. The ships surged. The rift's mouth devoured them in silence, one after another, until only empty space remained. Bennett gasped when they emerged. The enemy Armada, vast, ugly, immeasurable, hung before them in the void. Weapons charged, claws gleaming in the alien light, but every Karvax ship flickered, their systems crashing in an instant. Every sensor readout went dead. Even their cruel, chattering comm frequencies, always screeching, now dissolved to dead silence. The greater fleet of humanity hovered, bristling, fully armed. The Karvax shuddered in confusion, and the war ended in an instant. A silence so complete it shattered Bennett far worse than chaos ever had. Bennett stood frozen, breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat, staring at the impossible. The Karvax fleet, hundreds of thousands of warships that had haunted humanity's nightmares for 30 years, hung lifeless in the void like corpses suspended in formaldehyde. No weapons fire, no movement, just silence, vast and suffocating, pressing against the command deck until he thought the walls might buckle inward. "Sir?" The XO's voice cracked through the stillness, uncertain, almost afraid. "All enemy signatures are dormant. Their reactors are offline. Weapons systems unresponsive. It's like they just died." Bennett's hand gripped the edge of the console so hard his knuckles went white. He wanted to feel triumph, wanted to feel the rush of victory that should have flooded through him like fire, but instead, there was only a cold, creeping dread that started in his gut and spread outward like poison. This wasn't how wars ended. This wasn't how anything ended. Wars were supposed to be earned through blood and sacrifice, through losses that tore your soul apart until you didn't recognize yourself in the mirror anymore. This felt wrong, like cheating fate itself. "Run diagnostics on our systems," he ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know what the hell just happened." The technicians scrambled, fingers flying across holographic displays, pulling data from sensors that were screaming contradictory information. Bennett watched them work, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Had they triggered some kind of weapon? Had the rift itself done this? Or had humanity finally crossed a line they didn't even know existed? Behind him, he could hear the murmurs starting. Confusion giving way to cautious celebration among the younger crew members who didn't know better, who hadn't seen enough death to understand that easy victories always came with hidden costs. Bennett wanted to silence them, wanted to scream that this wasn't over, that nothing was ever this simple. But his throat felt like it was closing. "Sir, we're receiving telemetry from the outer perimeter," called out a sensor officer, her face pale beneath the harsh overhead lights. "The Karvax ships aren't just offline. They're broadcasting. Some kind of repeating signal." "Put it through," Bennett commanded, though every instinct told him he didn't want to hear whatever was coming. The speakers crackled to life, and a sound filled the command deck that made Bennett's blood run cold. It wasn't language. At least, not any language he recognized. It was something between a wail and static, rising and falling in rhythms that felt almost biological, almost like breathing. But beneath it, woven through the noise like threads of horror, were patterns, mathematical sequences, coordinates, and something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A plea. "They're surrendering," someone whispered, and the word hung in the air like a curse. Bennett closed his eyes, fighting against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. 30 years. 30 years of watching planets burn, of seeing children torn apart by weapons that turned matter into screaming energy, of signing death warrants for missions he knew would never come home. 30 years of hate, carefully cultivated and nurtured until it became the only thing keeping him upright. And now, in an instant, it had nowhere to go. "Confirm that," he said quietly. "I want visual confirmation on their fleet status." The main screen flickered, displaying feeds from dozens of scout drones spreading through the enemy formation. What they showed made Bennett's stomach turn. The Karvax ships weren't just powered down. They were dying. Atmosphere venting from hull breaches. Crew members, those horrible, writhing things that humanity had learned to hate with such perfect intensity, floating in the void, their bodies already going rigid in the cold. Emergency lights flickering across thousands of vessels, painting the darkness in desperate red. "How many?" Bennett asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Preliminary estimates suggest 2.3 million Carvax personnel across the fleet," the sensor officer replied, her voice shaking. "Life support is failing across all vessels. Reactors are in cascade failure. Sir, if we don't intervene within the next 20 minutes, they'll all be dead." The command deck erupted, officers shouting over each other, some demanding immediate action, others calling for caution, a few, the ones who'd lost the most, suggesting they let the bastards die and be done with it. Bennett listened to it all, feeling the weight of command crushing down on his shoulders like a physical thing, like the gravity of a dying star. His XO leaned in close, voice low enough that only Bennett could hear. "What did we do to them? What was in that jump protocol?" Bennett didn't answer because he didn't know. Project Dominion had been compartmentalized, classified beyond even his clearance level. He'd been given coordinates, jump vectors, and the promise that this would end the war. He'd trusted the scientists, trusted the generals, trusted the politicians who swore they knew what they were doing. Now, staring at the dying enemy fleet, he realized how foolish that trust had been. "Get me a line to Admiral Westbrook," Bennett ordered. "I need answers, and I need them now." While the communications team worked to establish a link back through the rift to Earth Command, Bennett forced himself to look at the data streaming across his screens. The Carvax fleet wasn't just disabled, it was fundamentally broken. Every system, every circuit, every piece of technology that made their ships function had simply stopped. Like someone had reached into the quantum foam of reality itself and switched them off. But it wasn't just their ships. The biological readings from the Carvax themselves showed similar patterns of catastrophic failure. Their neural systems were shutting down, their bodies convulsing in what the medical scanners identified as systemic shock. Whatever had hit them hadn't just destroyed their technology. It had struck at something deeper, something fundamental to what they were. "Sir, Admiral Westbrook is on the line," the comms officer announced. "Audio only. The rift is causing interference." "Put him through," static hissed through the speakers, followed by the Admiral's voice, distant and hollow. "Bennett, report. Did it work?" "It worked," Bennett replied, and he hated how dead his own voice sounded. "The Carvax fleet is neutralized, complete tactical shutdown across all vessels. But Admiral, they're dying. All of them. Whatever we did, it's killing them." There was a pause, long enough that Bennett thought they'd lost the connection. Then Westbrook spoke again, and there was something in his tone that made Bennett's fists clench. Something like satisfaction, like vindication, like the voice of a man who'd finally gotten what he wanted and didn't care what it cost. "That's unfortunate collateral damage, Commander, but acceptable. You have your orders. Secure the fleet, extract whatever intelligence you can, and prepare for Phase 2. "Phase 2? Bennett's voice rose despite himself. "Admiral, we're looking at millions of casualties here. We need to discuss—" "There's nothing to discuss, Commander. You have your orders. Westbrook out." The line went dead, leaving Bennett staring at the blank comm panel, rage and helplessness warring inside him. Around him, his crew watched, waiting for direction, waiting for him to be the leader they needed. But all Bennett could think about was his son's question from years ago. Do all wars feel like losing, even when you win? "Sir?" The XO's voice cut through his thoughts. "What are your orders?" Bennett looked at the screens again, at the dying ships and dying crew members, at the wreckage of an enemy that had suddenly become something else, something pitiable, something human in its suffering. He thought about the civilians back home who would celebrate this victory, who would never know the cost, who would sleep easier in their beds while he drowned in the weight of what they'd done. "Dispatch rescue teams," he said finally, his voice rough. "Anyone who can be saved, we save them. I don't care what Earth Command says." The XO nodded, relief visible on his face, and began issuing orders. Bennett turned back to the viewport, watching his ships move into the graveyard of the enemy fleet, and wondered what kind of man he was becoming, and whether he'd recognize himself when this was all over. The rescue operations began within the hour, and Bennett found himself watching through the viewports as humanity's warships, built for destruction, armed with weapons capable of cracking moons, carefully maneuvered between the dying Carvax vessels like shepherds tending wounded sheep. The irony wasn't lost on him, and it sat in his stomach like a stone he couldn't digest. His hands shook as he reviewed the casualty reports streaming in from the boarding teams. The numbers were staggering, not because they were high, but because they were climbing in the wrong direction. Every Carvax they managed to extract alive died within minutes of being brought aboard the human vessels. Their bodies simply shut down, as if proximity to humanity itself was toxic to their very existence. Dr. Patricia Nguyen, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, stood beside him at the command station, her face drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like horror. She'd been working for 6 straight hours, trying to understand what was killing their former enemies, and Bennett could see the toll it was taking on her. She was younger than him, maybe 35, with the kind of fierce intelligence that had made her indispensable to the war effort. Now that intelligence was turning against her, showing her things she didn't want to see. "It's not a weapon," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's systems. "Whatever did this to them, it's not any kind of technology we understand. It's like their quantum signatures have been fundamentally altered. Their atomic structure is the same. Their DNA is intact. But something deeper, something at the level of their consciousness itself, has been severed." Bennett nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd suspected as much from the beginning, but hearing it confirmed made the dread in his chest grow heavier. "How many have we lost?" "All of them," Dr. Nguyen replied, and her voice cracked slightly. "Every single Carvax we've brought aboard has died. The longest any of them survived was 17 minutes. They just fade away, like they're being disconnected from something vital." Bennett turned away from the viewport, unable to watch the rescue efforts anymore. Each small shuttle returning to the human ships carried bodies now, not survivors. Bodies of creatures that had once been humanity's most feared enemies, now reduced to corpses that would haunt the dreams of every human who saw them. He thought about the soldiers under his command, the young men and women who joined the military to fight monsters, now being forced to witness the systematic death of those same monsters through no action of their own. "There's something else," Dr. Nguyen continued, and Bennett heard the reluctance in her voice. "The readings we're getting from the Carvax ships, their technology isn't just offline, it's been rewritten. At the quantum level, every circuit, every system, every piece of their technology has been fundamentally altered to be incompatible with their biology. It's like someone reached into the deepest laws of physics and changed the rules." The implications hit Bennett like a physical blow. "You're saying this was intentional? Someone, or something, did this deliberately?" "I'm saying it's the only explanation that makes sense," Dr. Nguyen replied. "And, Commander, if whatever did this to the Carvax decided to target us instead—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Bennett's comm unit chimed, and he saw his XO's face appear on the small screen. The man looked exhausted, older than he had just hours before. "Sir, We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Westbrook wants to speak with you immediately. Put him through to my ready room, Bennett said, and get me a full status report on the rescue operations. I want to know exactly how many Carvacs we've attempted to save, and how many we've lost. The ready room was smaller than his command station, more private, and Bennett was grateful for the isolation as Admiral Westbrook's face appeared on the main screen. The Admiral looked pleased, almost triumphant, and it made Bennett's jaw clench with barely contained anger. "Outstanding work, Commander," Westbrook began, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd just won the biggest gamble of his life. "Preliminary reports indicate complete tactical success. The Carvax fleet is neutralized, their threat eliminated. You and your crew should be proud." "Admiral," Bennett interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. "We need to discuss what happened here. The weapon, or whatever it was that disabled their fleet, it's killing them, all of them. Every Carvax we've tried to rescue has died." Westbrook's expression didn't change, and that lack of reaction told Bennett everything he needed to know. "That's regrettable, Commander, but not unexpected. Project Dominion was designed to end the war definitively. Some collateral casualties were always anticipated." "Collateral casualties?" Bennett's voice rose, and he had to force himself to remain seated. "Admiral, we're talking about millions of sentient beings. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution." "It was necessary," Westbrook replied, his tone cold and final. "The Carvacs have been responsible for the deaths of over 2 billion human beings, Commander. They've destroyed entire star systems, committed genocide on a scale that defies comprehension. What happened here today was justice." Bennett stared at the Admiral's face, searching for some sign of the man he'd once respected, the leader he'd followed into this war. But all he saw was something harder, something that had been carved hollow by years of loss and replaced with a cold determination that terrified him more than any enemy weapon ever had. "What exactly was Project Dominion?" Bennett asked. "I need to know what we used against them." Westbrook paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Classified, Commander. But I can tell you this. It was developed based on captured Carvax technology, reverse-engineered and modified by our best scientists. We took their own quantum manipulation capabilities and turned them against them. It's poetic justice, really." The pieces began falling into place in Bennett's mind, and he felt sick. "You used their own technology to create a weapon that would specifically target them, something that would be lethal to their species but harmless to humans." "Among other things," Westbrook confirmed. "The beauty of it is that it's self-limiting. It can only affect beings with Carvax quantum signatures, completely safe for human personnel." Bennett thought about Dr. Nguyen's report, about the way the Carvax technology had been rewritten at the quantum level. "Admiral, what happens when this effect spreads beyond the immediate area? What happens if it starts affecting other species?" "It won't," Westbrook said, but Bennett caught a flicker of uncertainty in the Admiral's eyes. "The effects are contained to the jump coordinates. Everything was calculated precisely." "Calculated by whom?" Bennett pressed. "Who authorized this weapon? Who gave the order to commit genocide?" "Enough," Westbrook snapped, his composure finally cracking. "You have your orders, Commander. Secure the area. Extract whatever intelligence you can from the Carvax vessels, and prepare for Phase 2 of the operation. That's all you need to know." "What's Phase 2? Bennett asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "The Carvacs weren't just a military threat, Commander. They were the dominant species in this sector of the galaxy. With them gone, there's a power vacuum that needs to be filled. Human expansion into Carvax territory begins immediately." The screen went dark, leaving Bennett alone with the weight of what he'd just learned. They hadn't just won a war, they'd committed genocide on a scale that would make them the most feared species in the galaxy. And now they were planning to move into the homes of the dead, to claim the spoils of a victory that tasted like ashes in his mouth. He sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screen, thinking about his son somewhere among the fleet, thinking about the young soldiers under his command who would have to live with what they'd witnessed here. Thinking about the billions of humans back home who would celebrate this day as their greatest triumph, never knowing the cost of their survival. When he finally returned to the command deck, Dr. Nguyen was waiting for him with a new report. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she handed him the data pad. "Commander," she said quietly, "we have a problem. The quantum effects, they're not contained. They're spreading." Bennett looked at the data, and his blood ran cold. The weapon's effects were indeed spreading, slowly but steadily, affecting not just the Carvax, but other alien species in the surrounding systems. And if the projections were correct, it wouldn't stop there. They hadn't just ended a war. They'd started something much worse. Bennett read the data 3 times, hoping his exhaustion was making him misinterpret the numbers, but each reading confirmed what Dr. Nguyen had said. The quantum effect wasn't contained. It was propagating outward from their position at a measurable rate, a wave of death spreading through space like ripples in a poisoned pond. The projections showed it reaching inhabited systems within weeks, maybe days, depending on variables they didn't fully understand. "How many species are in the affected zone?" he asked, his voice hollow. Dr. Nguyen pulled up a star map on the main display, and Bennett watched as red warning zones spread across dozens of systems. At least 7 that we know of, minor civilizations. Mostly, species that maintained trade relations with the Carvax but weren't part of the war. They're all carbon-based, all using similar quantum biological structures to the Carvax. She paused, her finger hovering over one particular system. "This one here, the Varani. Population of about 4 billion. If the effect reaches them at current propagation rates, they'll start dying in 72 hours. Bennett felt the deck seem to tilt beneath his feet. 4 billion lives. An entire civilization that had nothing to do with humanity's war, about to be erased because of a weapon they'd unleashed without understanding its full consequences. He thought about Earth's population celebrating their victory right now, thought about the parades and the speeches and the monuments they'd build to commemorate this day, and he wanted to vomit. "Can we stop it?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the look on Dr. Nguyen's face. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't even fully understand what it is. The quantum signatures are unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if someone rewrote the fundamental laws that govern how consciousness interacts with matter, but only for specific biological patterns. Reversing it would require—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "We'd need to understand it first, and we don't have that kind of time." Bennett turned to his XO. "Get me every scientist in the fleet. Physicists, biologists, quantum engineers, I don't care what their specialty is. I want them working on this immediately, and I want a secure channel to Earth Command. I need to speak with whoever authorized Project Dominion." The XO nodded and moved to execute the orders. But Bennett could see the doubt in his eyes. They both knew that Earth Command wasn't going to help, wasn't going to admit they'd created a doomsday weapon that was now out of control. The politicians would bury it, the military would classify it, and billions would die while bureaucrats argued about jurisdiction and blame. "Sir," one of the comm officers called out, "we're receiving a transmission, not from Earth. It's coming from one of the Carvax vessels." Bennett's head snapped up. "I thought they were all dead." "This one's different," the officer replied, fingers dancing across her console. "It's from a ship near the periphery of their fleet. Life signs are faint but stable. They're requesting communication." Every instinct told Bennett to ignore it, to focus on the crisis at hand. But something in his gut said this might be important. "Put it through. Audio only." Static filled the command deck for a moment, then a voice emerged. Weak, rasping, speaking in broken human standard that had clearly been learned under duress. Commander, please, respond. Bennett stepped forward, his throat tight. This is Commander Bennett of the Earth Armada. Who am I speaking to? I am... The voice paused, struggling. Your language has no equivalent. You may call me Observer. was Strategic Coordinator for Carvax Defensive Operations. Another pause, filled with what sounded like labored breathing. I am dying. All my people are dying. But before I die, you must know what you have done. Bennett exchanged glances with Dr. Nguyen, who was already recording the transmission. Go ahead. We're listening. Your weapon. Observer's voice was fading, each word seeming to cost enormous effort. It did not just disable our technology. It severed our connection to the Unity. Do you understand? The Unity it is what binds all Carvax consciousness together. It is how we think, how we exist. Without it, we are nothing. Fragments, already dead, just waiting for our bodies to understand. The revelation hit Bennett like a hammer. The Carvax were a hive-mind species, or something close to it. Humanity had never fully understood their social structure, had been too busy fighting them to study them properly, and now they'd destroyed the very thing that made them a coherent civilization. The Unity, Bennett said slowly. Is it biological? Technological? Both, neither. It exists in the space between matter and consciousness, in the quantum substrate that your weapon targeted. Observer's breathing grew more ragged. But the weapon is flawed. It does not distinguish. It will spread to all species who share similar quantum patterns. It will kill them too. Billions, trillions perhaps, if it reaches the galactic core. Dr. Nguyen grabbed Bennett's arm, her face pale. He's confirming our readings. Commander, if this reaches the core civilizations, I know. Bennett cut her off. He turned back to the comm. Observer, can you tell us how to stop it? How to reverse the effect? A sound came through the speakers that might have been laughter or crying. Bennett couldn't tell. Stop it? You do not even understand what you have unleashed. Your scientists found Carvax technology, fragments from destroyed ships, and they played with forces beyond their comprehension. They created a cascade weapon, something that feeds on quantum entanglement itself. It spreads because it is designed to spread, to seek out similar patterns and destroy them. Bennett's hands clenched into fists. There has to be a way. Some kind of countermeasure, a fail-safe. There is one possibility, Observer interrupted, his voice growing fainter. The weapon's origin point, the coordinates where you emerged, the rift. If you could collapse it, contain the quantum cascade within this region of space, it might stop the spread. Might? Bennett demanded. What are the chances? Unknown. Perhaps 30%. Perhaps none. But it is the only path I see. Observer's breathing had become so quiet, Bennett had to strain to hear it. I do not expect mercy from you, human commander. My people have committed terrible acts in this war, but the innocent species who will die because of your weapon, they deserve better than to be collateral damage in our conflict. Bennett felt something crack inside him, some last wall he'd built between himself and the full weight of what was happening. Observer, I am dying now, the voice whispered. My last thoughts are of my offspring, my bondmates, all the Carvax who died without understanding why. Remember us, human. Remember that we were people too before we became your monsters. The transmission cut off, leaving only static, then silence. The command deck was utterly quiet. Bennett could hear his own heartbeat, could feel every eye on him, waiting for orders, waiting for him to be the leader they needed. But all he felt was the crushing weight of responsibility for genocide multiplied, for a weapon that was now beyond anyone's control. Dr. Nayan, he said finally, his voice rough. Work with the science teams. I want every possible option for containing this effect. I don't care how theoretical, how dangerous. I want options. Yes, sir. He turned to his XO. Contact the rest of the fleet commanders. Tell them we have a situation. And get me that secure line to Earth Command. I need to speak with Admiral Westbrook immediately. Sir, what are you planning? His XO asked quietly. Bennett looked out at the graveyard of ships floating in the void, at the rescue operations that had become recovery missions, at the spreading death that bore humanity's signature. He thought about his son, about all the young men and women in the fleet who'd joined to protect humanity, not to become instruments of galactic genocide. I'm planning to do what should have been done from the beginning, he said. I'm planning to take responsibility. The XO nodded, understanding in his eyes, and moved to carry out the orders. Bennett returned to staring at the viewports, watching the stars that suddenly seemed dimmer, more distant. Somewhere out there, billions of innocent lives were counting down their final hours, and the only person who might be able to stop it was a broken man who'd already lost count of his failures. He pulled up a personal comm channel, keying in the code for his son's ship. When the young man's face appeared on the screen, so much like his own, but not yet worn down by years of command, Bennett felt his throat tighten. Dad? His son asked, concern evident. Is everything okay? Bennett wanted to say yes, wanted to protect his son from the truth just a little longer, but the time for comfortable lies had passed. No, he said quietly. Nothing is okay, and I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. His son's name was Thomas, and he had his mother's eyes. Soft, brown, capable of seeing through every wall Bennett had ever built. Those eyes were watching him now through the comm screen with growing alarm, and Bennett realized he'd been silent for too long, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like goodbye. Dad, you're scaring me, Thomas said. What's happening? Bennett forced himself to speak. Tom, I need you to understand something. What we did here today, what I ordered, it wasn't a victory. It was a mistake. A terrible, catastrophic mistake, and now innocent people are going to die because of it. He watched his son's face shift from concern to confusion to something harder, something that looked like the dawning of a terrible understanding. Thomas was 24, a junior navigation officer on one of the destroyer escorts, and he'd inherited his father's ability to see through bullshit. The weapon, he said quietly. It's out of control. Yes. Bennett felt the word like a weight leaving his chest, but it didn't make breathing any easier. It's spreading. It's going to kill billions of beings who had nothing to do with our war, and I need you to know before I do what I'm about to do, that I'm sorry. For everything. For not being there when you were growing up. For choosing this war over our family. For becoming the kind of man who could order something like this. Thomas leaned forward, his face filling the screen. What are you about to do? Before Bennett could answer, alarms began screaming across the command deck. Multiple contacts emerging from the rift behind them. Dozens, then hundreds of signatures flooding into real space. Bennett's tactical display lit up like a Christmas tree, showing Earth command vessels pouring through the gateway they'd opened, an entire second wave of the Armada arriving right on schedule for Phase 2 of the operation. Sir, the XO shouted over the chaos. Fleet Command is hailing us. Admiral Westbrook is demanding immediate status update. Bennett looked at the flood of ships on his display. At the thousands of soldiers and crew members arriving to claim the spoils of a victory that was rotting before their eyes, and something inside him snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, final breaking of whatever had been holding him together. Put him through, Bennett said. Fleet-wide channel. I want every ship to hear this." His XO hesitated for just a moment, understanding flickering across his face, then nodded and opened the channel. Admiral Westbrook's face appeared on the main screen, stern and expectant, the face of a man who thought he'd already won. "Commander Bennett, status report. Has the area been secured for Phase 2 operations?" "Admiral," Bennett said, his voice carrying across every speaker in the Armada, reaching into every ship, every crew quarters, every command deck. "I'm hereby informing you and all fleet personnel that Project Dominion has failed catastrophically. The weapon is out of control. It's spreading beyond the Carvax and will reach innocent civilian populations within days." Westbrook's face darkened. "Commander, you are speaking on an open channel." "I know exactly what I'm doing, Admiral." Bennett's voice was steel now, forged in the fires of everything he'd lost and everything he was about to lose. "Every person in this fleet deserves to know the truth. We didn't win a war today. We committed genocide, and now that genocide is spreading. 7 species that we know of are in the path of the quantum cascade. 4 billion Varani, countless others. All of them will die unless we act immediately." The command deck had gone silent. Bennett could feel his crew watching him. Could feel the weight of thousands of eyes across the fleet turning toward their commanders, demanding answers, demanding truth. On the screen, Westbrook's face had gone from angry to coldly furious. "You are relieved of command, effective immediately," Westbrook said. "Security, place Commander Bennett under arrest for insubordination and—" "No." The voice came from Bennett's XO, quiet but firm. He stepped up beside Bennett, hands clasped behind his back in perfect military posture. "I stand with the commander. If you want to arrest him, you'll have to arrest me too." "And me," Dr. Nguyen added, moving to Bennett's other side. One by one, the officers on the command deck stepped forward, forming a line behind Bennett. The weapons officer, the navigation chief, the communications team. Even the young technicians who had everything to lose stepped up, choosing truth over orders, choosing conscience over career. Bennett felt something in his chest that might have been pride, might have been grief, might have been both. He looked at the faces around him. Good people, brave people, people who'd followed him into hell and were now following him into whatever came next. "Admiral," Bennett said, "we have one chance to contain this. Observer, a Carvax coordinator, suggested that collapsing the rift might stop the quantum cascade from spreading further. It's a long shot, maybe 30% chance of success, but it's the only shot we have." "Absolutely not," Westbrook snapped. "That rift is our gateway to Carvax territory, our route to expansion. We are not throwing away humanity's greatest strategic advantage because of some alien's dying words." "Then you're condemning billions to death," Bennett said quietly. "You're making humanity into the monsters we always claimed the Carvax were." "What I'm doing is ensuring humanity's survival and dominance," Westbrook replied. "The galaxy is a hostile place, Commander. This war proved that. If some lesser species die as a result of our victory, that's regrettable but acceptable. The strong survive. That's how nature works." Bennett thought about his wife, years ago, reading their son bedtime stories about heroes and villains. He remembered Thomas asking him once what made someone a hero, and he'd given some bullshit answer about courage and duty. Now, staring at Admiral Westbrook's face, he finally understood the real answer. Heroes were people who chose compassion over convenience, who valued other lives as much as their own, even when it cost them everything. "I'm going to collapse that rift," Bennett said, "with or without your permission." "You don't have the authorization codes," Westbrook said smugly. "The rift is controlled by Earth Command. You can't shut it down without—" "I don't need to shut it down," Bennett interrupted. "I just need to destabilize it. And for that, all I need is a ship with a quantum drive and a pilot willing to fly it straight into the Gateway's event horizon." The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Flying a ship into the rift's event horizon would create a cascade reaction that would collapse the artificial wormhole, sealing this region of space off from Earth permanently. It would also kill whoever piloted that ship, tearing them apart at the quantum level. "You're insane," Westbrook said, but Bennett heard uncertainty in his voice now. "You'd sacrifice yourself and cut off Earth's access to this entire sector." "To save billions of innocent lives? Yes, Admiral, I would, because that's what duty actually means. Not blind obedience, not following orders without question. It means doing what's right, even when it costs you everything." "Dad, no." Thomas's voice cut through from the still open channel to his ship. "Don't do this. There has to be another way." Bennett looked at his son's face on the smaller screen, saw the tears forming in those brown eyes, and felt his heart break. "Tom, listen to me. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I wasn't there for your first steps, your graduation, all the moments that mattered. I chose war over family again and again. Let me make one choice that matters. Let me do something good before I go." "Sir," Dr. Nguyen said urgently, "the quantum cascade, it's accelerating. The propagation rate has increased by 40% in the last hour. If we don't act soon, collapsing the rift won't matter. It'll be too late." Bennett nodded, then turned to his XO. "You're in command now. Once the rift is collapsed, focus all resources on helping the survivors, both Carvax and the other species in the affected zone. Do whatever you can to slow the cascade, to save whoever can be saved." "Sir," the XO started, but Bennett cut him off. "That's an order." He looked around at his crew, at the people who'd stood with him. "All of you, you did the right thing today. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let Earth Command bury this. Don't let them make this into some heroic sacrifice story. Tell the truth. Tell people what really happened here, what their victory actually cost." He started toward the shuttle bay, but Thomas's voice stopped him. "Dad, please, don't leave me, not like this." Bennett turned back to the screen, looking at his son one last time. "I love you, Tom. I should have said that more often. And I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved. But maybe I can be the man you can be proud of. Just this once." He cut the channel before Thomas could respond, before he could hear his son's voice break, before he could change his mind. The walk to the shuttle bay felt like it took hours, though it was probably only minutes. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by all the lives depending on what came next. Behind him, on the command deck, alarms were sounding as Earth Command ships realized what was happening and moved to intercept. But Bennett's crew was already locking them out of fire control systems, already buying him the time he needed. In the shuttle bay, a small reconnaissance craft waited, its quantum drive humming with barely contained power. Bennett climbed into the pilot's seat, hands steady despite everything, and began the launch sequence. Through the viewport, he could see the rift, that ugly tear in space that humanity had opened in its desperation for victory. And beyond it, spreading like poison through the stars, the death they'd unleashed. He fired the engines and accelerated toward the point of no return. The shuttle's engines roared as Bennett undocked, the hull panels rattling under the strain. The ship wasn't designed for what he was about to do. It was a scout craft, lightly armed, mostly built for evasive maneuvers and short-range jumps. But its quantum drive was powerful enough to pierce the rift. That made it the only tool he had to finish what humanity had started. On the viewfinder, the rift hung before him like an open wound in the sky, its violent colors bleeding into space, shifting bands of violet, silver, and a deep, pulsing blue that looked almost alive. Somewhere within that churning turbulence lay the engine of extinction they'd unleashed, a weapon so advanced even its creators hadn't understood it. As the shuttle accelerated, he keyed the comm to his XO. This is Bennett. Confirm rift coordinates and lock the fleet's position. Once I'm inside, maintain distance. I repeat, do not follow. Sir, you'll never make it back, the Exo's voice came back, tight with emotion. That's the idea, Bennett said. There was a long silence on the other end. When the Exo finally spoke again, his words were low, steady. Good luck, Commander. We'll make it count. Bennett didn't answer. Some words didn't survive the weight of honesty. The rift filled his view now, all-consuming. Around its edges, he could see the warped silhouettes of stars distorted by the gravity shear. The space between matter and madness. The closer he got, the more the shuttle began to buck and groan, warning lights flaring, structural integrity fields fluctuating. The heat shields, designed to withstand atmospheric re-entry, glowed white-hot in vacuum. He thought about Thomas, his boy, his voice breaking over the calm when he begged him not to go. He thought about his wife, long gone now, her picture still magnet-clipped to the inside of his locker aboard the flagship. Sometimes he'd talk to her photograph when the corridors were empty, whisper things he couldn't confess to living souls. He wondered if death would let him see her again, and if she'd forgive him for what he'd become. The shuttle jolted as it broke the first magnetic envelope of the rift. Lights flickered, gravity failed, and for an instant, space itself seemed to tear. A blinding surge of static split the cabin, tossing him against the restraints. A scream of energy drowned out every other sound. He gritted his teeth and forced his hand back to the controls. Then, in a breath, the chaos subsided. The noise, the light, the vibration, all gone. The sensors showed nothing. No horizon, no stars, no up or down. Only the inside of the rift. It didn't look like space. It looked like thought. Filaments of energy coiled around the shuttle in slow, deliberate motions, like something ancient was aware of his presence but hadn't decided what to make of him yet. The air shimmered with soft static, like whispers trying to form words in his head. He swallowed his fear. "Computer," he said, voice strained. "Locate quantum singularity nexus. Target for detonation at maximum containment yield." The AI's synthetic voice responded calmly, as if oblivious to what was happening. "Coordinates locked. Estimated detonation radius, 6 astronomical units. Probability of containment, 28.6%. Bennett stared at the numbers. 30%. Just like the Carvax had said. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He flipped open the manual override cover. His hand hovered above the final command key, the one that would initiate the drive overload. His throat burned. It wasn't fear anymore, not really. It was the terrible clarity that comes just before the end, when every moment you've ever lived rushes back into focus. He saw the first battlefield of his career, back when he still believed in heroes. He saw the faces of his dead soldiers, the friends he'd buried under alien suns, the child he couldn't save during the fall of Tauria, her hand slipping from his in the rubble. He heard the Carvax screams through the comm, remembered the first time he heard their language. Once guttural, monstrous, before he realized it was filled with pain. And then he saw Earth, his home, blue and small, spinning in the dark. A world he loved more than its mistakes. He pressed the key. The quantum drive began to scream. Instantly, the view outside the shuttle changed. Threads of light converged toward the shuttle, drawn into it like rivers collapsing into a drain. The rift reacted violently, rippling with waves of distortion that made the universe itself tremble. Instruments went mad, symbols flashing incomprehensibly. He felt his bones hum inside his skin, every cell vibrating at frequencies human biology was never meant to experience. The AI spoke again through the distortion. "Warning, cascade reaction accelerating beyond forecast. containment probability, decreasing. How much? Bennett managed to choke out. 13%. He grinned despite the pain. That's about right. The cockpit filled with blinding light. Time lost meaning. The edges of reality peeled away, revealing something deeper, a place between existence and absence. For an instant, Bennett felt every consciousness across the galaxy like flickers on a vast ocean of thought. Billions of lives, human and not, echoing in a fragile harmony. He could feel the cascade, the weapon's malignant wave, moving like a cancer through everything that lived. Then, for the briefest heartbeat, he felt something else. A presence. Not human. Not Carvax. Something greater. Something old. It wasn't speaking in words, not exactly, but he understood it anyway. An understanding that bypassed language and sank directly into his mind. You touch that which was not yours to touch, it seemed to say, and yet you seek to fix what you have broken. He didn't know if it was God, or the universe itself, or some remnant intelligence left behind by the Carvax's unity. He didn't care. He only knew that it was listening. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The presence didn't answer, but the pulsing chaos around him seemed to pause, like the universe was holding its breath. Then everything collapsed. The rift imploded inward with impossible force. Light, color, energy, all folded into a single point so bright it ceased to exist. The shockwave rolled out in silence, distorting the fabric of space-time. Across the fleet, miles away, crew members on hundreds of ships watched as the rift vanished from existence in a brilliant sphere of white. Then there was nothing. On the flagship's command deck, silence reigned. Dr. Nguyen stood motionless, her hands trembling as she stared at the lifeless sensors where the rift had once been. "Status?" the XO asked, his voice rough. She forced herself to read the data. Numbers still flooded in, stabilizing slowly as space settled. Quantum radiation subsiding, cascade propagation slowing, She blinked hard. "It's reversing. The field's collapsing back toward the event point." Relief swept through the deck like a wave, mixed with disbelief. A cheer started somewhere near comms, choked off as quickly as it began when the realization set in. Bennett wasn't coming back. The XO took a slow breath, straightened his shoulders, and gave the order to all ships. "Begin recovery operations. Log Commander Bennett's status is missing. Presumed dead in action." Thomas heard it from his station on the destroyer's bridge. The words hit him like a weapon. The crew around him went quiet, glancing at him but saying nothing. He stared at the empty comm channel where his father's ship had last transmitted. His hands shook uncontrollably, and he had to force himself to breathe. "He saved us," someone said softly behind him. "No," Thomas replied, voice low but steady. "He saved everyone." 2 hours later, the fleet's long-range sensors confirmed it. The quantum cascade had stopped spreading. The affected zones were shrinking. The Varani system would live. The weapon that had threatened to destroy creation itself was gone. But Bennett was gone with it. In the days that followed, his name became legend. Earth Command tried to control the story, branding him a hero who had bravely completed Project Dominion and secured humanity's place as galactic power. But the officers who'd served with him refused the propaganda. They told the truth. The real story. The one Bennett had ordered them to tell. Word spread through independent channels. Through colonies, through alliances. Across the stars, people, human and alien alike, spoke his name with reverence and sorrow. Dr. Nguyen became the public voice of the surviving Armada. She testified before the Interstellar Council, detailing the full scope of what had happened. Humanity was sanctioned heavily, stripped of expansion rights for a generation, forced to recognize the sanctity of alien life they had nearly erased. It wasn't perfect justice, but maybe it was enough. Thomas, now a symbolic figure to both Earth and its allies, turned down every promotion that followed. Instead, he retired to a quiet colony near a red sunrise sea, one of the few places left untouched by war. There, he built a small memorial, a simple marker with his father's name carved into stone. Not a monument of triumph, a reminder of consequence. He'd sit there some evenings, watching the twin moons rise over the water, listening to the wind move through the grass, and he'd think about the man his father had become in his final hour. A man who found his soul in the act of giving it away. Sometimes, when the air shimmered, just slightly, he'd swear he could feel a voice in the stillness. Not words exactly, but a feeling. A warmth in the dark. Peace. And beyond the stars, where the rift had once been, there was silence, for the first time in a long, long while. The Armada moved cautiously through the aftershocks of the collapsed rift, space itself still strained and shifting like a wound that hadn't quite closed. Bennett's sacrifice had stopped the quantum cascade, but its echoes lingered, residual radiation warping reality near the collapse site. Relics of the weapon's unspeakable power threatening to unravel the delicate balance they'd so desperately fought to preserve. Thomas stood on the bridge of his destroyer, his face etched with the weight of command far beyond his years. The crew was tired, physically, emotionally, spiritually. They'd survived an apocalypse they barely understood and lost the man who'd carried their hopes on his shoulders. Yet in the quiet moments between orders, Thomas felt the undeniable pulse of something new, a fragile hope blooming through the ashes of devastation. Earth Command had reluctantly recognized the catastrophe they'd unleashed, and much of humanity now turned inward, wrestling with the consequences of their ambition. The Interstellar Council had convened emergency sessions, redrafting treaties and establishing strict safeguards on quantum technologies. Expansion would be measured, cautious, with respect long ignored, now vowed to be the foundation of their galactic relations. Yet even as peace hinted at a fragile dawn, the scars of war ran deep. Executors of Project Dominion were being tried, public hearings unveiling grim truths once hidden behind classified walls. The narrative of righteous triumph gave way to painful reckonings, the story no longer of war survivors, but of survivors from a great moral collapse. Thomas made it his mission to honor his father, not as a war hero, not as a martyr, but as a man who chose humanity over orders, conscience over convenience. He sought to rebuild bridges with species affected by the cascade, dedicating himself to healing where destruction had reigned. His fleet worked alongside alien scientists and diplomats, fostering partnerships rooted in humility and shared survival. Meanwhile, the legend of Bennett spread quietly across space, a whisper among colonies and settlements, a symbol of sacrifice without ego. To those who knew him best, he was a reminder that even flawed men could wrest meaning from chaos by owning their failures, and that in the darkest wars, compassion remained the greatest act of rebellion. One evening, on a quiet colony world, as twin moons cast silver light over a still ocean, Thomas knelt by the modest memorial constructed for his father. The simple stone was worn smooth by wind and rain, yet its message endured, a testament to the price of power and the reclaimed hope forged in sacrifice. He placed a small, blooming flower at its base, a symbol not of victory, but of lasting redemption. Above, distant stars shimmered, their light undimmed by war, bearing witness to the silence left by a rift no longer bleeding death. And somewhere deep in that vastness, a voice whispered on the wind, A benediction, a promise, a peace earned through the courage to undo what had been broken. Years later, long after the last of the Armada's engines were silenced and the fire of that terrible war had cooled into the dim embers of history, space itself seemed quieter, a wound healed, though not forgotten. The rift was gone, sealed forever, and with it went the last echoes of the Carvax War. Humanity had learned something in the silence that followed, the kind of lesson carved only by loss and guilt, branded not in words, but in graves. A memorial orbited where the rift had once been. It wasn't grand or polished, not plated in gold or carved from immaculate stone the way Earth's monuments were. It was dark, coarse, made of the very metals salvaged from the wrecks of the fallen fleets, human and Carvax alike. On it were etched the names of every soldier, every captain, every engineer, every life lost to that war. One name at the center gleamed faintly above the rest: Commander Aaron Bennett. They never found his body. There hadn't been one to find. What was left of him had folded into the rift's collapse, scattered into a storm of light and dust. Yet across the centuries, people still spoke his name, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a prayer for restraint. Thomas Bennett stood at the viewport of a diplomatic cruiser, watching the memorial drift across the expanse. Earth had changed during his life. He had changed with it. His hair was streaked with silver now, his once clear eyes shadowed with time. He wore a uniform still, though the medals had long been removed. He no longer needed them. The younger officers still called him Sir, sometimes with awe, sometimes with quiet pity, because they all knew who he was and what his father had done. Captain Bennett, a soft voice broke his reflection. Dr. Nguyen, or rather Chancellor Nguyen now, approached from behind. She was older, too, but she still carried herself with the same measured grace that had once made soldiers listen without question. "They're ready for you," she said, offering a faint smile. The Varani delegation arrived early. Thomas nodded. "How's their planet?" "Recovering," Nguyen replied. "Slowly. It'll take decades before their atmosphere stabilizes, but life's returning." They asked to place a wreath at the monument, one for their dead and one for him. Thomas's throat tightened at that. It wasn't easy to think about forgiveness, not after everything. Yet the Varani, who had once been so close to annihilation by humanity's hand, had become some of Earth's closest allies. They taught humans what humility looked like, and in return, humanity gave them a vow that something like Project Dominion would never be built again. Thomas walked with Nguyen down the corridor toward the diplomatic chamber. The ship hummed softly, an old fleet cruiser retrofitted for peace. They passed through murals of the old Armada, the same ships that had burned half the galaxy in the name of survival. Once, humanity had decorated its walls with images of battle. Now they painted stories of reconciliation. In the chamber, the Varani stood waiting. Their forms were willowy, translucent, their movements slow and deliberate. They bowed, graceful even in their alien fragility, and one of them, the eldest, extended a relic, a sliver of crystal glowing faintly blue, humming with soft resonance. "Human Bennett," the elder said, their voice melodious even through the translation field. "Your father acted when others would have stood still. The unity of Carvax still mourns its dead, as we mourn ours. But the living must choose between memory and anger. Today, we honor memory." Thomas bowed his head, accepting the crystal with both hands. "On behalf of our people," he said, his tone quiet but clear. "Thank you. He'd want it this way." The ceremony was brief but heavy with meaning. Every word between them felt like the stitching of a wound, long torn open. When it was done, Nguyen placed the crystal into the ship's observation core, where it would orbit with the memorial forever. A light among the names. After the delegation departed, Thomas lingered near the viewport again. Stars stretched endlessly before him, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere beyond them, humanity was starting over, not as conquerors or warriors, but as participants in a galaxy too vast to dominate. Colonies were being rebuilt with cooperation instead of annexation. Star drives were restricted by the Pact of Sol, a treaty forged in the aftermath of Bennett's sacrifice. Yet not all was peace. Humanity's hunger lingered, quiet, waiting beneath the humility like a coiled shadow. There were still voices in the halls of Earth Parliament who argued that the Dominion weapon had been a show of strength, not shame. That the galaxy respected humanity because of what it could do, not what it chose not to. Each generation needed to decide which voice it would listen to. That night, Thomas returned to his cabin, exhaustion settling into his bones. He poured himself a drink, something synthetic, dull, unaged, but warm enough to burn away the silence. On his desk lay an old data recorder, scratches marring the casing. It was the last message his father had ever sent, transmitted seconds before he'd entered the rift. Decades old, preserved on 1,000 systems, but he still listened to it once every year. The hologram flickered to life, and Aaron Bennett's voice filled the room, rough and steady even at the end. "Tom, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, or if the ship will survive long enough to send it through. But if you do, if these words reach you, then it means the galaxy still exists. It means something worked." There was a pause, the faint hum of engines and static crackle filling the space. "I've spent my whole career trying to make sense of what humanity means," his father continued. "We build, we destroy, we justify both with the same words. Progress, survival, destiny. I used to think we were the heroes of our own story, but that's not true. We're just the ones still living long enough to learn." Another pause, softer this time. "Maybe one day you'll see what I couldn't. That strength isn't found in victory. It's found in restraint, in choosing to be kind when cruelty would be easier. If you can do that, you'll be twice the man I ever was." The recording ended there. Thomas sat for a long time in the quiet that followed, feeling the echo of that voice, his father's final gift. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly, light bending around distant dust clouds. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the sharp ache of loss, only gratitude. Weeks later, as the ship prepared to depart for Earth, the crew gathered in the observation dome for a final farewell ceremony to the dead. Soldiers and civilians alike paid their respects, depositing symbols from their respective worlds into the memorial's vault, offerings of unity from across the stars. When it was Thomas's turn, he carried with him a small metal insignia, his father's old command pin, tarnished, worn smooth by years of handling. He placed it on the altar beside the Varani crystal, and stepped back as the symbol locked into the memorial's surface and began to glow faintly beneath the transparent casing. The XO, an old friend by now, leaned in quietly. "You think he'd be proud?" Thomas nodded, gaze fixed on the stars. "Not proud, no, but he'd be at peace." The man gave a faint smile. "That sounds about right." And maybe it was. When the ship turned toward Earth, the memorial receded into the dark, a small glimmer adrift between galaxies. Yet through the long transmission relays, through subspace channels and silent satellites, the story of what had happened there, the story of Aaron Bennett and the weapon that ended one war to prevent a greater extinction, lived on. On Earth, schoolchildren would